Hello, everybody. Today's lecture is going to be about the Bill of Rights. One of my favorite topics to talk about, actually, because it's related to us as individuals, and it also talks about rights that we oftentimes refer to. And it's probably a part of the Constitution that most people are familiar with, or at least have an interest in, because the rights that are outlined in the Bill of Rights directly affect us individually. So I just want to reiterate that a little bit. So what we'll do is we'll go through these rights. I'll explain them briefly to you. Also, I wanted to let you know that as I'm talking about this topic, you probably want to refer to the um, the notes. That's what I'm trying to say. The notes that go with this. So if you are looking at my screen right now, and not just my voice, you can find the notes for this lecture under the classwork tab. And I have them actually in week 13 and week 14. So if you look down here where it says GS5 lecture notes, the Bill of Rights, you will see that the notes that go with this are here. So to keep this easy for you, I have created this for you and filled in the blanks of normally what you would see in class. These are the things that you would normally record related to each of these topics. What I would also be thinking about as I go through this, and as I describe some of these things to you, think about some real life examples of how these rights apply to things that you would think about in the real world, okay? Because that's really what this is about. It's to try to get an understanding of these rights and how they really affect us in reality, like not just on paper, but in personal experience. Okay. So when we think about the Bill of Rights, as we start here, we think about the Bill of Rights as being the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Again, the condition of the ratification of the Constitution, ratification meaning the approval or the acceptance of this document, was that a Bill of Rights would be added to it. And this was something that anti-federalists were very, very much wanting. They wanted to make sure that when the government was formed under the Constitution, that it would specifically say what those rights were that individual citizens had. So once the Constitution's written, they include these. They include these a couple of years afterward. In 1791, as you can see, December 15th to be exact, and they become a part of the Constitution. Since this time, since 1791, going all the way into 2020, we have only added 17 additional amendments to the Constitution, 17 changes or 17 like additions to this document. So you can see that an amendment becomes really powerful. They become really important. They become sort of what the will of the people want as representatives through Congress as they vote on these things, because it takes an act of Congress to actually change the Constitution. In fact, it requires all the states to have input and approve a change, which is really important. Okay. The First Amendment, which hopefully you're somewhat familiar with now, we've had a couple of assignments on this, really is about our rights of religion, right? Our rights to assemble, come together as a people, the right to petition our government, to ask our government for change, the right to a free press, the right to journalism, and the right to have journalism freedoms to ask questions of our government and to write about what our government's doing, both good and bad, and the right to free speech, the right to have the ability to say what we want to say, and not be censored, stopped from saying that. Okay. So, speech has some limitations to it. We can't just say whatever we want. I can't just yell fire in a theater, especially if there's no fire, because that's against the law. I can't say things that are inflammatory or things that would threaten the public good or cause violence, and legally get away with that. Generally, the idea behind the First Amendment is that it involves acts that are peaceful acts. So, for example, if I'm, practicing my own religion, which is a right that we have in this country, you can practice whatever faith that you want. You have the ability to do that as long as it doesn't endanger the lives of your parishioners, right? So let's say that I want to join a religious faith, but that religious faith encourages me to go out and do violence, or that it encourages me to do some crazy stuff. There may be limitations on that religion placed under the law that could be argued that that religion is not acceptable. Okay. And there's many examples of this that, we can think about throughout history. Certainly the idea of a cult, right? CULT, and some of the actions of cults have been questioned legally in the past, where the government has stepped in. I can think of the Branch Davidians as an example, which was a group I think it was in the early 2000s or late 90s that was active in Texas, and then the FBI and stuff got involved, and they ended up burning the building down. A bunch of people died, but they ended up doing all this kind of crazy stuff because they were committing crimes according to the government as a part of their faith. So there's lots of conditions to these things. It's not just blanket cut and dry that you can just do whatever you want here, but it gives us a lot of freedoms that a lot of countries don't have. And that's something that we need to appreciate. So when you look at Assignments 22 and you think about Assignments 21 in particular, because that's related to the First Amendment, think about what some of those particular rights are, and that there are some conditions. The right to assemble peacefully, right? Here's an image in front of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., where we have a large crowd assembled. And there, as long as it's peaceful, and I believe this one is where Martin Luther King Jr. was delivering his "I Have a Dream" speech in the 60s. They become really an important action by us as citizens to be able to execute our civil liberties. The Second Amendment is all about the ability to, and this is actually from the statement of the Constitution, to have a well-regulated militia. A militia being a group of citizens that can bear arms, can carry guns to defend the state against outside influences. So a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, and the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Infringed means to be taken away from you. So this is a kind of one of the more controversial amendments, at least in the recent part of our history, not so much in the past, but this idea that we have the right to own a gun, okay, and that the Constitution gives us the right to bear arms. One of the things I will say about the Second Amendment, it's been attacked a lot by interest groups who believe that there's certain kinds of firearms that should not be allowed in society because they are not necessary. They do, irreparable harm, like the idea of owning an assault rifle or assault weapon is not necessary. It's not necessary to use 20 shots out of an assault rifle to go hunting for wild game, for example, or the right to bear arms and have them not be visible to the public. So this is something that's quite controversial, and maybe we'll have a little discussion about this topic in class together. But the whole intent of the original writing of the Second Amendment was to give people the right to own weapons, originally because they used them for hunting, for providing food for their families, for putting food on the table. And also, if you think about the intent of this, the whole point of the American Revolution was that citizen soldiers would rise up as a militia to defend their rights, and they needed weapons to sort of protect themselves against an unjust government. And there's a lot of people in this country, even today, that feel like there's a necessity for us to own a weapon to keep sort of the government, in check, to let the government know, the government being those that are in charge, know that we still have the power in this country to take power back from an unjust government. And a weapon is something that is a tool to get to that point. The Third Amendment, and by the way, as I do this, I should kind of go through and, go RAPS, right, for the First Amendment: religion, assembly, press, petition, speech. For the Second Amendment, the way to remember this is 2 guns for you, right? 2 guns for you. The Third Amendment is 3, you can't stay with me. Now, what is this one all about? This one is referred to from an act that happened in the American Revolution, from what was called the Quartering Act. And the idea behind the Third Amendment is that no soldier shall, in time of peace is the key here, be quartered. Quartered meaning the idea of living in your house, your quarters, without your consent as the owner of the home, nor in time of war, but the manner to be prescribed. So let's explain this. One of the real beefs of the American, population prior to the American Revolution, and during the American Revolution for that matter, was that when the British were sending soldiers to the colonies, when they didn't have enough housing for the soldiers, they were basically forcing people to have British soldiers live in their homes, sleep in their beds, eat their food, things like that, without their consent or their approval. And people felt like that was an infringement on their personal property, number one, and their privacy. Okay, so this amendment was designed to protect the people from the government just abusing that power. There is one condition, though, that in the time of war, the government can, in a time of war, put soldiers in homes, but it has to compensate the owner for that. Okay, it has to pay you essentially to rent the space that you have, or give you some sort of compensation. So it's rare that would happen because we're not at war all the time, in the sense of being like in a full-scale World War II kind of thing. But it's something that we oftentimes refer to as it's like the right to privacy. It's like the right to not have somebody just come onto your property and just do whatever they want. The Fourth Amendment, 4, is shut the door. Okay, 4, shut the door. And this is the right of the people to secure in their persons, their houses, their papers, and their effects against what's called unreasonable searches and seizures. Searches of your property and seizures of your property. It shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue. Okay, a warrant is basically a document from a judge that says they have a right, the government being like law enforcement, have the right to search your house or your property without probable cause. So there has to be some reasonable indication that the law is being violated in some way, issued by a judge. So the judge is sort of like the independent, neutral party that will determine that, supported by an oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the person or thing to be seized. Okay, so what does this mean? The Fourth Amendment, again, is the right that nobody can just enter your house, law enforcement being or anybody random, unless you give them permission to do so, unless, here's the key, they have what's called a warrant from a judge, which is an affidavit from a judge that says that law enforcement specifically believes that there's been a criminal act committed or that there's evidence of a criminal act. So it has to be specific as to the location of what's going to be searched and what they're looking for, okay, which is really, really important here. Now, does that mean that somebody at school can't say, hey, come to the principal's office, I want to talk to you and I want to look into your backpack because I think you've done something wrong? This does not protect you from that because that's happening on school grounds, and there's a different set of rules for that at school. But let's say that somebody comes to your house, they knock on the door and say, hey, I'm going to come in. You can say, no, you're not. You don't have a right to come in, and it's against the law just to randomly come into my house unless they present a warrant from a judge to you. Now, are there some exceptions to this? Yes. Is it different from state to state? Yes, there are some exceptions to this. Like, for example, if somebody believes that somebody's imminently in danger, like I see fire, I see smoke, somebody's yelling, help me, help me. Can I come into your house to look to save a life? Yes, you can. If I find some evidence that there's been something criminally done wrong while I'm there, could I get in trouble for that? Maybe not, because that's not what your original intent to be there was for. So there's lots of conditions to this. And we'll talk about that in class. 5, Fifth Amendment. 5, if you want to stay alive, don't testify. Testify. This amendment says that a person may not be put on trial for a serious crime unless they have been indicted, which basically means formally accused by what's known as a grand jury. Okay, a grand jury is a group of people that volunteer basically to serve for 1 year, and they will determine if there's enough evidence to warrant a trial. It also protects against what's called double jeopardy, where double jeopardy meaning that you can't be tried for the same crime twice, okay? And being forced to testify against yourself in a court of law, that's probably the key to this whole thing. You can't be forced to say something in a court of law that might make you look guilty, okay? So, Mr. Klinger, have you ever stolen a Snickers bar from Safeway? Well, if I tell you that I did, am I going to be guilty? Well, yeah, because you're going to admit to it. So what could I say? I could say, I plead the fifth as it may incriminate myself, and I will refuse to answer the question. Now, in reality, have I ever stolen a Snicker bar from Safeway? No. But let's say somebody accused me of doing that. If I said it and it would make me look guilty, then it could be bad, right? So I can use the Fifth Amendment to basically protect myself from what's called incriminating myself against saying something that would make me look guilty, okay? It also states that we can opt to be deprived. Deprived means having something taken away from us of our life, liberty, or property without what's called due process of law, okay? And that private property cannot be taken for public use without compensation. So there's a lot of stuff to this, okay? Due process of law means that essentially I have certain rights. They have to be followed in a court of law. And if any of those rights are violated, then the case may be thrown out of court, right? Let's say somebody lies on the witness stand. They're proven to be a liar. Or maybe somebody's in the jury who's determining my guilt or innocence, and maybe somebody's tampered with that jury member. Like they've convinced them to make me guilty, and because they've given them money to do so, that might be a violation of due process. Again, the whole idea of due process of law is that I'm innocent until somebody proves that I'm guilty, okay? So there's a presumption of innocence. There's a presumption of innocence before you are just determined that you're guilty. Somebody has to prove your guilt first, okay? Also, private property cannot be taken from you unless you're compensated for that. So here's another example of another part to this. Let's say that somebody wants to build a freeway, right? The government, the state, the county wants to build a freeway, and your house is in line with that projected path of the freeway. Can the government just come in and say, hey, we're going to take your house away from you and we're going to bulldoze it because the public needs a freeway to be built? Well, no, they can't just do that without compensating you, giving you money for the fair value of that property first, okay? So let's say my house is worth $1 million and it's in San Mateo and they want to build a freeway. They have to give me the fair market price, $1 million, for that piece of property before they can actually just build a freeway and take it from me, okay? Double jeopardy, the whole idea behind this is if I commit a crime, I can't be tried for the same crime more than once, no matter where it happens, okay? We'll talk more about that. The Sixth Amendment. Sixth Amendment. Here it goes. 6. Fair jury. Let me see where my hand's at. Fair jury, and I'm going to stand up. Trial in a hurry, okay? A lawyer, here's my tie, a lawyer for free. Know the charges on me, okay? Fair jury, trial in a hurry, a lawyer for free, know the charges on me. This amendment guarantees a person accused of a crime that they have a right to a trial, okay? They have a right to a trial by a jury chosen from the state and district in which the crime was committed. It also says that the accused person has a right to be defended by an attorney and must be told the charges against them, right, before they're actually formally arrested. Actually, it's like you have to know what you're being charged with and why you're being held. Okay, so there's also a lot to this. A jury trial can be asked for by a citizen on any civil matter. Honestly, any civil matter like non-violent crime, like a crime of like what we would consider like property crimes or things like that, for any amount over $20. Actually, $20. I mean, the law hasn't changed. It goes all the way back to like 1791. $20 today doesn't seem like a lot of money. And in fact, if you go and you say, I want a trial, because somebody's accusing me of stealing $25 from them, the judge is going to likely want to discourage you from having a jury trial because the cost might be more, but you still have the right to actually say, I want a jury trial. It's protected by the Sixth Amendment. You also have a right to be tried in the state or the county of where the crime occurred. There are some extenuating circumstances where that might not apply, depending on the type of crime that it is. If it's violent, and the court feels that you might not get a fair trial because people know everything about what happened already, at least through the media, then they might say, hey, we request to have it tried somewhere else in the state. But generally speaking, it needs to happen, the trial, the court action, where it happened at, the location. When I say location, state, county, things like that. It also says that you have a right to a lawyer, an attorney, okay? Some of you may have heard the idea, or you've seen a lot of crime television where they go, you have a right to, you have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed to you. Some of you may have heard these in some like TV shows. That's basically reading to you your Miranda rights. It's called Miranda rights, and there's a whole court case that developed related to the right to hear your right to an attorney, the right to not say anything that might incriminate you under the Fifth Amendment, right? Things like that. All right, let's move on. Seven. If it's civil meaning not an act of like violent crime, if it's something related to property or divorce or family custody thing, anything that's not involving violence, like burglary or murder or some crazy stuff. If it's civil, don't worry. Have a trial by jury, okay? Have a trial by jury. Actually, have a trial by jury. So here we go. 7, if it's civil, don't worry. Have a trial by jury, okay? This amendment guarantees the right to a trial by a jury in cases, like I said before, involving more than $20. But in modern times, more money is usually at stake before a case is heard in what we call federal courts. So you can think of the Seventh Amendment as sort of protecting your right to what we might call white-collar crimes, crimes that are associated with nonviolent acts, where maybe fraud, tax evasion, some sort of family issue. Like I honestly always think of the Seventh Amendment as involving some sort of property damage. And I'll talk to you about stories that I have been involved with in real life that have been related to this in a previous job that I had working for a big company, because I used to have to go to court and defend the company on some of these things, not as a lawyer, but as a part of the company, okay? Eighth Amendment. 8. No horrible fate, like bad, like no horrible fate, excessive bail. That's bail means the money that's going to cost to get you out of jail temporarily. So no horrible fate, excessive bail, fines, or jail. And here's my jail cell, okay? No excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed on anyone, nor cruel or unusual punishment inflicted on anyone, okay? Talk about cruel and unusual punishment. Like, what's for lunch today in the lunch line? That's cruel and unusual. Well, is it really? Probably not in the reality of life. But let's talk about this guy in the stocks, right? Bail, B-A-I-L, is money that you pay to a court, which basically promises that you will come back to court at a later date to face the charges against you. It's a way to get you out of jail instead of sitting there for months, maybe years, before your court case is actually heard. Bail is set, the amount is generally set by a judge depending on the type of case or what you're being accused of. Petty theft may not have any bail at all. You may not even go to jail for that. You may pay a fine and you may go home. Murder, you may not get any bail because you might be a risk to society. So there's all kinds of degrees of like descriptions of different kinds of things that you can do and what bail might be set at. Okay. No excessive fines under the Eighth Amendment can be imposed on you. Let's say that a cop sees you walking across Barneson and you're not using the crosswalk. You literally what's called jaywalk, right? You walk across and you don't use the crosswalk. And there's a cop sitting there and he says, hey, come here, I want to talk to you. You know that's illegal to not use the crosswalk. And you say, I didn't know that. And he goes, well, you should because it's against the law. And I'm going to give you a $10,000 fine for doing that. Okay. Is that excessive for jaywalking? Most judges would say absolutely. That's way too much money to fine somebody for the type of action that you did, right? So no excessive fines can be imposed on somebody, or no cruel or unusual punishment, right? If you go to jail and you're sitting in jail, cruel and unusual punishment would be you never get to come out of your cell, you get bread and water. That's cruel and unusual. If you think the lunch food here is bad, then think about what it would be like in prison. It's much better actually because they believe in supporting the Eighth Amendment and the idea that you have the right to not have cruel or unusual punishment, no torture, things like that. That's a protection. The Ninth Amendment, this is an interesting one because it basically says that it makes it clear that citizens of this country have any additional rights that may not be specifically listed in the Bill of Rights. I like to call this amendment sort of like the trapdoor amendment. I don't know why I always think of the trapdoor, but I kind of think of it as like a trapdoor that falls out. So the idea here was when the founders wrote this, they said, well, wait a minute. What's the problem? Could it be that if we don't list all of our rights out here, the government could say, well, you don't have those rights because they're not listed? That's what some people said. If you don't have them, then they couldn't be listed here. Well, the Ninth Amendment protects us and basically says if it's not written in the Constitution, it doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have that right. Okay? It's like a right that we could have if we need it, even though it's not listed. So it's like an escape plan is my kind of way to think of that, like a trapdoor. In assignment number 22, I'm actually asking you to make up your own way to remember assignment or amendment number 9, okay? Whatever that might be. Come up with your own kinetic visual to kind of remember that. The last amendment to the Bill of Rights is the 10th Amendment. And this says that the powers not delegated, that's given, right, to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Okay, so what does this mean? It means that if it's not written and it's not a power that's given to us through the Constitution, then the states have a right to determine on their own what those rights are individually. Okay, so let's say that I live in California. I might have a whole series of rights that might be different than if I lived in Texas, okay? Because it's not outlined in the Constitution that I have those rights. I might have them specific to the state that I live in. Now, this is important because we understand that there are different kinds of needs of different kinds of people that live throughout this country. I mean, this is what makes this country so interesting and so great is that it has a lot of variety, okay? So the states are given the power to determine what rights citizens have within the borders of their states. Okay, and it may be different than from another state. A good example and an obvious one that I like to use, which doesn't mean I support this or not, but it's one that's obvious, is the marijuana laws that were recently passed by many states in this country. In California, which was one of the first states, they basically said that it's not illegal to consume marijuana medicinally to start with as a medicine, and then later on they decided, you know what, we want to do it, and we want to give citizens the right to consume it recreationally, like for fun, for pleasure. Okay, other states said no, we don't like that, and we're not going to agree with California. California can do whatever they want. Now, there's a controversy here because some might interpret the federal government's laws that they would say, well, marijuana is technically illegal still. It's considered a class 1 narcotic, and it's punishable by a crime of imprisonment. So there's a big controversy to some degree as to an interpretation of what individual rights we have. And this is what makes this content so interesting, is because you can argue, depending on where you are in the country, against the federal law, and create your own laws within your own borders that say that it is legal, actually. And there's many other things like the death penalty, property rights to certain degree, medical rights like assisted death, for example, which sounds really morbid, I know, but if somebody's really ill, sick, and they're terminally ill, they're not going to live. Does somebody have the right to assist them to end their life? In some states, they do with a doctor's, oversight. In other states, they say no, you can't do that. You have to let the natural causes in that person's life. And I'll talk about some of this with you in class because I can give you some insight to this from a personal experience level. Okay. All right. So, if we go through this, and I'm going to probably save this for class, actually, this slide here, and maybe we'll talk about this, and we'll see if we can figure out where these things go. I want to kind of end this discussion. I know I've talked kind of fast and given you a lot of information. Again, really focus on assignments 20, 21, 22, 23 for this discussion, and maybe even 24 as I develop maybe something else that goes with this. Again, focus on also the notes, okay? Focus on the notes, because the notes here will break this down for you into the parts that I think are sort of relevant being important, all right? And, really focus on this back page because it's breaking some of these more complicated amendments that have more moving parts to them, like the 6th and the 5th and the 4th and maybe even the 8th. It'll give you a little bit more description about what they're about, okay? So thanks for listening. If you were doing a TikTok dance while you were listening to this too, that's fine. Take away with this what you can, and then we'll have some more discussion about this in class together, okay? All right, guys, that's going to be it for me. I'm going to go ahead and sign off here, and I hope you all have a great day. Okay. Let me see if I can do this. All right. Bye.